I want to explore today why the government is cutting a bunch of infrastructure projects and why this is probably the right idea. I'm basing this off two government reports. First and primarily, Infrastructure Australia's Market Capacity Report, which, unsurprisingly, explores Australia's capacity for building more infrastructure. Second, the Executive Summary, as unfortunately they have not released a full report yet on why the government is cutting the projects they said they were cutting. So, getting into the market capacity research, it should be noted that everything said here has been said before, with the last 4 reports over the last 4 years noting supply issues, with the problem only getting worse over time. An important note is that the report was released last year, so keep that in mind. Starting with the overall demand for supplies, there are currently 5,500 construction projects planned for between 2022 and 2026, representing $647 billion. Of those 5,500 projects, 4,800 of them were added in 2022. This is a massive increase in demand for construction, as you can see. Notably, private construction accounts for about 78% of the expected forecast, of which about half is private residential activity. But there is about $237 billion of major public infrastructure. And to set the tone, there was an additional $15 billion added to the major public works infrastructure in 2022 just through cost estimate revisions. Importantly, this major public infrastructure is highly concentrated, making the demand even more sharp, with 84% of spending in New South Wales, Victoria, and Queensland. So, do we have enough supply to meet this demand? In short, no. In long, no way. Keeping in mind that all these numbers are based in 2022 figures, with a peak of projected spending, assuming there isn't more, will be in 2024 and will be 70% increase from this point. As of 2022, 40% of major construction companies were already operating at 90% capacity or above, with a further 25% operating at about 75 to 90% capacity. In terms of specifics, let's look at non-labor supply, i.e. materials. In 2022, we already saw a significant increase in non-labor costs of about 24%, with 35% of vendors reporting an increase of more than 30% in prices. In especially essential material like reinforcing steel and structural timber, we saw prices jump by 40% between 2020 and 2021. Keeping in mind these existing price rises, it is predicted that just for major public projects between 2021 and 2024, it will require 50% more labor, 150% more equipment, and 120% more materials. It is not easy to increase supply for these materials. For example, let's look at steel. At current rates of production and imports, we will run out of steel between 2023 and 2024. Growing steel capacity is difficult, partly driven by the fact that the steel industry is often not engaged early enough in the project life cycle. Quote, there are some projects, and they can be significant projects, where we get a phone call 8 weeks out to say, hey, we're delivering this project and we need X amount of steel in 8 weeks' time. Now, that just does not work. Also, labor shortages, the boom-bust cycle of investment, which discourages long-run investment, and a cycle whereby engagement with the steel industry only happens in the last few months of the financial year all at once. Another example is the raw materials from quarries to make things like concrete and asphalt. There are a number of limitations here. First, it can take 10 years to get approval and build new quarries, even when well outside of metropolitan areas. It is also difficult for existing quarries to expand capacity. Second, there has been industry consolidation, leading to less supply of things like concrete pipe manufacturing, where it takes 2 to 3 years to establish new manufacturing. Third, once again, there is a massive labor scarcity. Fourth, specifically in quarrying, trucks and drivers are a big issue, with there being a year-long wait for new trucks. There are similar stories throughout the industry, where beyond specific material issues, there is a widespread labor shortage and significant lead times to create new capacity, even if there weren't other issues, which there are. Okay, so that's the material situation. Doesn't sound great. How is the labor situation? Somehow, even worse. To set the stage, over 2022, average labour costs in the industry already increased by 17%. Just looking at public infrastructure projects, there is a shortage of 214,000 workers, peaking at 248,000 in 2023. That is over double the existing workforce. This affects every area of the industry, as you can see below. This is also assuming no new projects before 2025 are planned. As we can see, predicted supply is nowhere near meeting the minimum required numbers, which is not helped by a recent report finding that there has been a decrease in 23% this year in construction tradies commencing in TAFE. While, as we can see, there is a very significant adjacent workforce of 874,000 people working in other construction projects, there is no reason to think they would necessarily move to public projects given the very significant rise in private projects. There is only 51,000 trainable in 6 to 12 months and 329,000 who could complete training in 1 to 3 years. But based on previous estimates of shortfalls in labour of about 200,000, we can see that it is very unlikely we are going to even have the numbers. This is made worse by the fact that Australia already has a tight labour market of about 3.5% unemployment, whose effects are highlighted in the fact that adjacent industries already pay more than construction. Now, let us examine the implications and other risks. First, there is the delays of projects. Quote, no longer if, but when and by how much. At current projections, it is likely we need delays, and they will most likely occur regardless due to supply constraints, with the estimate currently being taking up to 53% longer to complete major public works infrastructure. We can see the effect here by the dotted line. Second is the current concentration in industry and the risk of insolvency. Large public projects generally require a range of skills and high specialization, resulting in the fact that 82% of public infrastructure projects were awarded to just 5 Tier 1 companies, presenting significant risks if one was to go into default, and also reducing competition in the market. The insolvency rate in construction is quite high, and this may actually increase despite the high levels of demand due to supply constraints causing prices to fluctuate widely and unpredictably. Finally, to really put the cherry on top, a long-term issue in the industry has been productivity. Productivity has not improved since 1990, and to the extent that we did see gains in the mid-2010s, that progress has actually reverted, so we are not exactly doing more with less. Okay. So given these significant supply constraints, I think we all begin to understand why projects were canned. But now I want to examine a few more reasons that the government explicitly cited. First, those cost overruns I mentioned earlier due to the increasing prices doubled between these reports being developed, with the number being currently 32 billion, of which 14 billion is for projects that have not even started yet. This has caused the projects to exceed the $120 billion budget the government had. Second, there are a number of projects that, quote, do not demonstrate merit, and were entered too early before proper analysis of the costs and benefits were actually completed. This is partly because many small-scale projects were funded during the COVID as a job stimulus, but also because the number of projects tripled between 2015 and 2022 without adequate planning. With all that in mind, it is actually surprising the government has not cut more projects, with it only cutting 50 projects that have not yet begun, whereas the independent review recommended 100 to be cut and a further 56 to be reviewed due to their high risk. Thank you.